Welcome to Launch 2017, the first ever from Learn On Demand Systems. Corey Hynes,
Bork.
Brian Bork, and we are your guides for the next hour as we kind of get set up and get started with kind of the first time we've ever done this. So I want to begin and just kind of tell you a little about what we're doing and what Launch 2017 is all about. So this is an event for content creators. We have a lot of companies that build labs on our platform, and so this is an event to help you learn all the things you can do, whether you're just getting started, some of the more advanced scenarios that we're going to be showing you, or if you're looking at building solutions and programs that are around the content that you've built for the platform. So to get started, I just want to take a few minutes and walk you through what the agenda is for the next couple of days. So I'm just looking at our website here for the event. And so we've broken this event into 3 programs. We have what we call our Ideal Studio program, which Brian is going to be you for the next day and a half.
That is correct.
Pretty much full time. You've got some wonderful guys helping you. You've got Quinn and you've got Victor.
I do.
Both work on our content team, and you bring a lot of experience to the table.
Yep.
And then we have our Advanced Developer program. So this is where you'll primarily see myself and either Kirk or Robert. And so we're going to take you through some of the more advanced topics. And then we've got a Solutions program. The Solutions program is more about how you build larger programs around these tools. So Brian, what sort of things are you covering in IDL Studio?
That is an excellent question. Most of the topics range from beginning development all the way through to final tips and tricks for optimization and getting ready for actual delivery.
So when we do, for example, our lab developer training, when folks first get on board, this is kind of what they're getting, only maybe a much more expanded version of it.
It's very much more expanded. Normally we do about an hour and a half of orientation for our beginning lab developers, and in this case we're going to be spending a day and a half. So
that's
it's
fantastic.
Great. It's a wonderful time.
On the advanced developer side, we've got honestly some really fun topics.
Yes.
Virtual routers and switches. How do you build elaborate networks that let you teach things like Cisco, routing, switching? Kirk, who's in here, has got some really cool demos where he's got 5 switches in a lab, multiple routes, and you've got to figure out how to configure all these things so that the pings can go through.
Right. So
router switch configuration. We then move on to one of our kind of fun, one of my favorites, cyber range. So we've recently, I guess we're releasing it now, is what we call our shared lab environment. And one of the scenarios for this is the cybersecurity world, where you want to go in and have a target, and then all the students can attack the same target. And so we'll learn how to build those. We'll then look at solutions for cloud. Right? Cloud's a big part of what we do, yep. Azure, Amazon, Google, as well as other scenarios. Then we're getting into GitHub. We've gone all in with GitHub. You can use GitHub as an authoring platform for Lab on Demand. And so what are some of the ways you can do it? How does it work? And then finally, our APIs, and then one of my favorites, performance-based testing.
Yes.
So how do you take a lab and turn that lab into an exam? On our solution side, we're going to look at, we're more than just a platform, we're also a services company. And so you can build all this content, but how do you now get that content in front of your customers? And so you can do it through large events, which we have a logistical planning service for that. We can help you design and build the event. Or you can sell it on a marketplace. And our marketplace partner is Arvado. Right. So you can actually, through us, sell through their marketplace. We then move into something that's specific for our learning partners, because they're obviously a big and important part of our customer base, is what we're calling managed mock.
This program.
Everything in here kind of ties together a little bit, because if you look at what we're doing with GitHub, it ties into this because a lot of mock is now being stored on GitHub. So we've got a number of things in place where we keep our experience far more current by leveraging some of those technologies, by having some people in place, and making sure that if something's on GitHub changes, the students get that change right away. Or if there's an issue or a bug or whatever, and you learn about things like our bug reporting engine, which is a fun thing. And then finally, we have a session on our LMS platform. This is obviously what's the word I'm looking for?
Cycle?
No. An event. The whole thing we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is obviously an event targeted at content creators, but we also want to look at the back end of how you deliver that content.
Absolutely.
And so the LMS, or One Learn Training Management System, is what a lot of these companies use to schedule classes, instructors, book students, and just kind of give you that, I want to walk in, sit down, log on, get access to all my stuff.
Now, you know that I never want to correct you, but you just used LMS and training management system.
I know. We call it a training management system.
TMS.
TMS.
There you go.
So that's the plan. So what we want to do is kind of walk you through kind of what we are and what some of these big things mean. So our goal, and I want to spend a second on this, is empowering organizations of any size to deliver experience. I'm not going to read it all.
Apparently you are.
I'm not. I'm going to stop right there.
Okay.
But the idea is that we're focused on experience-based training. It's not VM hosting. Right?
That's correct.
That is one small slice of a very large pie, and is everything from testing the experience, managing cloud providers, giving you the authoring tools, working with things that are both virtual machines and not virtual machines, to bring that kind of whole circle all the way around. And the reason that we think about it that way is because in reality, learning is changing. So when we think about the environment that you're delivering content for and building content for, the world that we're in right now is a just enough right now world, right? So the days of, I want to go sit in a classroom for 10 days or 6 weeks or even 5 days or 3 days is rapidly changing, all right? And as you're getting more into, as things are getting more and more complex, there's so much to know that, you can't just say, I'm going to take an administration class and learn everything I need, because you need 20 of them, right?
Exactly.
So it becomes more a case of, what is it I need to accomplish? What's my custom path to success? And how do I get the nuggets I need to learn just enough to get right there? And so a lot of our tools are designed to help you build just enough right now. A lot of the training now focuses on tasks, not concepts.
Right.
You'll see this a little bit in a few minutes when we talk about the idea of cloud providers and where they fit in. But as the world moves to a more cloud-centric world, the traditional IT administrator role is becoming more of an application administrator role. You're not going in and running wires and building servers and dealing with all the really low-level stuff. You're dealing with, things like, how do I configure it so that users get email, users get documents, users get application capacity?
Right.
An upgrade is a button click, not a screwdriver in a case and RAM, right?
Correct.
So it's, in that sense, becomes a lot more similar to app training. And the techniques we used to do for app training back, many, many years ago. Generalists are becoming specialists, right? Because
Correct.
there's so much you need to know, it's very difficult to say, well, I know a little about everything, right? You've got to kind of pick a focus area and go very, very deep, and the hands-on becomes incredibly important, right? No more is the concept enough. You've got to be able to get in and do it. And so these are just, patterns that we see both through what our customers are doing, what they're booking, what they're launching, and also what people are actually creating.
Right. I have a case that I always use when I talk about tasks, not concepts.
Yeah.
And that is that if you have a broken pipe in your house, you don't want to learn how to become a plumber. You want to fix that broken pipe right then and there, and so you want to learn that specific task.
Exactly
not
right.
Everything else about being a plumber.
Here's another way we think about it, and this is, a bit of, I think, an interesting visualization of it. If you look at the way things were in the past versus kind of where they are today, and what a company does for their infrastructure. So if you think about, a company wants to deploy something, it can be as simple as, hey, I want to get everybody email, or it may be as complex as I want to build my own custom in-house application.
Right.
What the company is doing and what the service providers are doing is becoming more and more separated. So in the past, if a company wanted to deploy this, database application, they'd start by buying servers and installing, SQL or Linux or something and building a database application.
Right.
Today, they might go, we're not going to do that physical stuff. We're just going to subscribe to something on Azure, something on Amazon, something on Google, and we're going to let them handle the heavy lifting of the fabric, right? And so you're seeing this movement towards hybrid environments where you're combining on-premise, on-premise or on-premises. Neither one is really the correct term, but we know what it means.
We know what it means.
Some variation of on-premise technology with subscribing to something in a cloud provider. And companies are more and more turning over that responsibility to the cloud provider for the real heavy lifting, because it's a form of risk management.
Right.
And in fact, we're doing that.
Right.
Our training management platform, OneLearn Training Management System, runs on Azure.
Absolutely.
Right? We made that switch about 6 months ago. we're quite happy with it. And one of the reasons is, our decision to how we accommodate growth. Do we want to invest in more clusters and more fabric and more disks and more storage and then, people to run that? Or do we want to just let them deal with it?
Yep.
Right? And in the end of the day, we kind of said, you know what? Our expertise is in building these experiences for people. Let's let someone else handle the hardware. Right? And we're doing the same thing with Lab on Demand. Right? So Lab on Demand in the very near future is going to be running on Azure. We've already got our testing environments up there. All our acceptance, when we do our own code releases, we do obviously testing on it most of the time. They all run in Azure. Right? And so the primary platforms are going to go up there, I think in the next couple of weeks. So it's the trend. And so when you design content and you design training experiences, you now have a massive additional responsibility, which is how do I incorporate things that are outside my positive control? How do I incorporate credentials for Amazon or Google or Azure? Right. How do I incorporate deploying resources somewhere else with simulating the environment that the company would actually have?
Right.
So we break these into kind of 4 categories of people. We have what we call fabric administrators. Now, what is the fabric? This is a term that it's not really an industry standard term. It's kind of my term, but it's
You're allowed to make those up.
I'm allowed to have terms.
Right.
But it's essentially the guys that do the physical layer of the network, storage, virtualization, networking, right?
Right.
Those guys or gals, just again generic term. Those people.
People. There you go.
There we go. How do we train them? Because it's that's becoming an increasingly difficult thing. How do I walk in and say, I'm going to train you on how to build a 4 router network? How do I do that in a virtual on-demand environment? Well, we can, right? And so the very next session we do actually after this in this room was myself and Kirk, and we're going to talk about how we incorporate switches into Lab on Demand so you can design these really elaborate networks to simulate, I got 2 routers and a WAN link and I want to configure the routers, which is something a fabric administrator might do. I want to configure a SAN. I want to configure, virtual machines because we support now nested virtualization on both VMware and Hyper-V.
Right.
So how do I deploy, these fabric level environments? Then we have DevOps, which is, an increasing term that very few people really understand what it means. And if you ask 10 people, they'll give you 10 different definitions. But, a developer builds an application and they say, hey, Brian, put this on Amazon for me. Well, you're now the DevOps guy because you got to understand the cloud, you got to understand what the developers are talking about, you got to bridge that, connect the dots and make it happen.
Right.
And so we support training in those scenarios where we can deploy virtual machines plus cloud infrastructure, all in one single environment and manage it. So it's addressing that DevOps scenario. Then for developers, we're doing some really fun things for developers. We have a few things in here where you don't need a virtual machine to have a development environment.
Right.
And so we've got an integration with a company called CodeEnvy that provides a browser-based development environment that supports like 600 billion languages.
Okay.
That's
a lot.
It's a C3PO development
Okay,
environment.
excellent.
That's
fluent in all those languages.
It is. That's a reference for Quinn, who's the Star Wars fanatic. So where you can just have that instead of a virtual machine, and instantaneously you've got a place to write code.
Right.
In addition to that, we can score code. So if you take a logic problem, we can test it and tell you if you get true or false.
Right.
And then finally, what we've done for years and years and years, our bread and butter, which is implementation.
Right.
So how do we implement, on-premise environments, deployments of Windows, et cetera, et cetera. And so we kind of look at it this way, and I'm not going to spend much time here, but this is sort of a holistic view of how we think about all the different services that we have. We empower learning by doing through a number of methods, our platforms and tools, our services, this notion of constant innovation, and then we surface that to all our customers in different ways, through our cloud automation technologies, through our training management systems, through the IDL Studio, the authoring platform, through a number of different APIs and extensions, whether it's LTI, whether it's our JSON API, through PBT, for example, so you can score things. So there's a very big sort of holistic picture of how we're addressing all of these different scenarios.
And I think this slide is important just because a majority of our customers don't know about all of this. It's very holistic. So
Cool. All right. I'm almost out of breath already.
That's all right. You can talk about every single one of these people on the slide.
No. Brian and I had a conversation about this right before we started.
We did.
We're a virtual company, and we don't. My opinion is, I don't need a building for what we do.
Right.
We deliver things via the cloud, so why bother? So our people are literally everywhere.
Literally.
And I've talked to every one of them, but I can't put a face with everybody's name.
That is correct.
And we hired a couple of new people, so I looked at it and I went, who's that guy? And
yes,
Brian,
he did actually say, who's that guy in the corner? And it turned out it was Quinn. He did not recognize him.
Sorry, Quinn.
To be fair, Quinn is in his disguise because he's got his sunglasses and his hat on.
I know.
I think it was probably 50 degrees that day.
Yeah, it was incognito. Quinn's a Florida boy, so.
He's giving us the stink eye.
He is.
He is.
Some interesting statistics for you. And this is, just in case you're wondering. We added, by the way, so if you kind of look through this, there's a lot of things that we're doing. We've almost doubled our usage in the last year. So we've gone from roughly 500-ish, actually tripled, average users per day to now we're running 1,500 average users per day. So it's a lot. It's a big jump, and it just shows that how, as we've embraced this notion of just enough right now models, really ramped up Ideal Studio, giving people the ability to build their own content, it's just taking off. And we're running anywhere from 4 to 5 major features per month. Well, not necessarily, but 4 to 5 platform features per month. We crossed the 11 million lab boundary last
That was
weekend.
exciting.
That was 31 million virtual machines. So constant, and those things are just chugging. It's 11 million, 100,000 already this week. And we added, I mentioned 50 terabytes of hosting memory for the on-premise stuff. We added 5 more or 7 more to that just last night. We approved the expansion just because the demand is so great. And we're actually opening 2 new data center locations. We're going to add another, I think, 10 to 20 terabytes of capacity, which we'll talk about towards the end. So, a lot of investment that's going back into making sure that the tools and the platforms we give people, are certainly world class.
One thing that shocked me, if you can go back to that slide, one thing that shocked me about this slide was 30% of all sessions use cloud technologies. That just blew me away because that is such a huge focus for multiple companies, not just Microsoft, but a whole slew of them.
Yeah, and I mean, the way a lot of that works is, people think, well, it's in the cloud, I don't need, anything on premise, so to speak. Well, if you're going to build something for the cloud, and this is one of the most common use cases for all these things, you need a developer workstation. Right, so I need something with all the tools I need, the SDKs, the command line tools, the PowerShell modules, and so a lot of the classes that we run that are cloud focused have a fairly powerful dev workstation in them. And so people think, well, the memory consumption might have gone down because all you need is a desktop. Well, you need a 16 gig of RAM, 20 gig of RAM desktop because you're running Visual Studio and SDKs and emulators and all these tools. So it becomes, ironically, it almost went up a notch because of these really high-end robust workstations that now, you give people, because you walk into a class and someone says, cool, we're doing a cloud class. Can you spend the next 4 hours installing all this stuff? Before you do that, you got to patch everything because it won't install until you patch it. And I've already got it installed, but you got the old version, so it doesn't work. So this notion of the consistent desktop, where I can work on all the current tools, is the most valuable thing that we're bringing to that table.
Absolutely.
So as we mentioned, this is an event for creators. Right? You want to create lab content. You want to build lab content. We're going to teach you how to do it. And so one of the primary tools that we have is what we call IDL Studio. Now, IDL stands for Integrated Digital Lab, and it's the environment where you can go in and build your own labs. You don't need us to do it for you. If you take the training, which if you're here, congratulations, you're taking the training. You just got to watch Brian all day.
Just watch me.
Yeah, well,
now,
you've got to try to watch Brian all day.
Yeah, that could be a challenge. But I do want to ask you, what does IDL stand for again?
Integrated Digital Lab.
Not interactive digital learning.
No.
Okay. Just making sure.
Integrated Digital Lab is what it officially stands for.
Excellent.
Lots of people have called it was Interactive Digital Lab, and
Integrated works for me. I just want to make sure I'm calling it the right thing.
Ideal is a term.
I can call it whatever I want.
Call it whatever you want. So this is the environment you go in and you can actually build your own content. And so this is Brian's job the next 2 days.
2 days.
Is to walk you through how you build the content using Ideal Studio. And then my job is to walk you through, with Kirk and with Robert, the more advanced versions of, the scenarios you can build. Once you have those basic VM environments, and then adding things like PBT cloud integration, GitHub integration, cyber range, switching, networking, how you do all those more advanced scenarios.
Yep.
So you've already attended or you're already building labs, then you probably want to stick with myself and Kirk and Robert, what I refer to as the cool crew.
I have cool people too.
You do. You have Quinn and Victor.
I do.
We are sold on GitHub. We brought Kirk. Kirk's a PowerShell MVP that we brought on board just under a year ago to help with some of the automation technology that we were trying to build. And so one of the first things he said was, "How come you guys aren't using GitHub?" He wrote the email in PowerShell, which that's just Kirk. And so we said, okay, well, let's look at this thing. And what we realized is that there's a lot of value that a platform like GitHub can bring to what we do. And so there's a couple of ways that we're actually using it. Number one is we now publish our documentation there.
Right.
And so if you are on our platform at all and you go to the top and you go to this IDL guides, it lands on our GitHub page. And so we're building documentation here and we're maintaining documentation here, and any one of our customers can contribute to the documentation that's here. And there's supposed to be a web access guide up here, Brian.
Yes, and there will be.
Good.
It's in development.
It's in development. And then we also have a PBT guide that's in development. But
right.
You can see there right now, there's the authoring guide for IDL, there's the markdown guide on how you can use GitHub as a source for labs, and then also our cyber range shared lab guide.
Right.
So you can read about all the different ways you can do that. That's one way. The other way, two ways we're doing it is your lab instructions can be stored on GitHub. Okay.
Yes.
When you store the lab instructions on GitHub, you can maintain and author them there. So you gain things that GitHub gives you, like version control, check-in, check-out, branches. You can roll back. You can see changes. You get all these rich capabilities that our customers have been wanting, but we've just kind of elected not to build in the platform. Mm-hmm. And we kind of said, you know what? It's here. It's an increasingly popular platform. Let's just use that.
Right.
And so, we had, for example, we let people write labs in Word, and we would import a Word document. Well, Word's not the best environment to author content in. That's not a great way to put it.
That is a way of putting it.
It is a way of putting it. We want our content very structured.
Correct.
Right? Because if we're going to import it, it's got to follow a particular format, structure, headings, et cetera. Now, in Word, there's just so many options. It's hard to say, it's hard to keep people on that fine path so that it'll import successfully.
Correct.
With GitHub and using Markdown, it's a more basic language. Mm-hmm. So it's simple and easy to use. It's a lot easier to learn and understand. So you can now go on GitHub, you can write your lab in Markdown, you can write it in our platform, export it to GitHub.
Correct.
And then any changes you make on GitHub, the platform picks up automatically. And we'll see how to do that and how it works in a later session. And then the third thing that we're doing is, if you're working with, right now it's Azure, but we want to add Amazon and Google down the road, is you can have an ARM template, which is an Azure Resource Manager template. And you can store that on GitHub, and that can define your lab environment. And so you can now maintain the definition of your lab environment on GitHub, and when you launch the lab, it pulls down the definition and will deploy it as a lab on Azure, so actually on the Azure Fabric. We want to deploy it on our Fabric as well down the road. So you can, rather than, have, for example, your virtual machine definitions for Lab on Demand in a GitHub document, and when you click Launch Lab, it'll read that, work out how much RAM, how many networks, and just deploy it on our platform. So these are all things.
Cool.
Yeah. So a lot of this stuff is live today. The GitHub stuff is, consider this the official announcement. It's in there. We're working on the final bits of documentation, and you'll be able to go in and do all that. The Azure Resource Manager stuff has been in there for about 6 months now. and there's some bits and pieces that are coming in the near future. So we've got a pretty significant investment in this, as a platform that we want to work with going forward.
By the way, I do
Yeah.
want to mention that we do have some people who are paying attention to us out there and sending in messages, but do those smiley faces look like they're really, really angry?
It does. Like, why are they angry? I don't understand.
We hope they're smiley faces.
Yeah.
So welcome guests, and it's nice to see you out there.
Maybe they're just new to the whole emoticon business.
Maybe.
Yeah. You want
They're grimacing. That's what they're doing.
Yeah, they're grimacing. All right, so the next one that we have is our performance-based testing. Okay. And so this is something that we've rolled out a while ago,
Yes.
and it's something we're adding to sort of on a continual basis. But this is the notion that you can actually run a lab and score it. Okay.
Correct.
And so the two major scenarios for this are, number one, you do a lab and you want to know at the end of the lab, did the person successfully complete the steps in the lab? And so you can actually score the steps.
Correct.
Right, so we track the steps right now. So we can say, you did 10% of the lab, 20%, 30% of the lab. But now, in addition, at the end of the lab, we can run a series of validation scripts to see if you created Bob, added him to a group, and gave him permissions to a file.
Yep.
And whether or not you followed the instructions or deviated, it will verify you actually did that. Really, really powerful. Now, obviously building that is an investment. It's not for everybody. It's only for like kind of those high value scenarios.
Yep.
But it's there, and people are using it today.
They are, and it's doing very well.
The second major scenario is strictly the testing scenario. So I want to do a certification exam, for example, or a practice exam, and I just want to say, hey, here's an environment, and go do something in it. I want you to delete a file, install a service, and make a configuration change. And at the end, I'm going to check those three things and see if you actually did them.
Correct.
And if you actually did them, you get points.
Right.
And so we'll talk about in depth how we do performance-based testing, how you build those, how you configure them. And the cool thing is you can take any lab you have today and with one checkbox, turn it into an exam.
I love that feature.
And there's, and you've got different ways that you can do it. There's run a PowerShell script or a shell script to do it.
Yep.
But you can also do really simple ones like, here's a VM and here's a bunch of questions where you got to dig through it and figure things out, right? Bob can't print, why not? Here's 4 reasons you got to go figure out. Well, is the spooler service stopped? Is the printer not installed? Is there an error in the driver? What's the reason that he can't print? And you got to fix it to figure it out. Or maybe you got to say, hey, what's the IP address of the web server because you need to make a firewall rule change?
Correct.
If you got to know how to figure that out. And so you give some choices, and they got to find it. And just, that way you don't got to write a script. The results are maybe not as valuable. Because you can possibly guess it.
Right.
But it's a lot easier to do because you don't got to write the validation script. So we'll definitely be, we got a whole session on this. This is with one of our partner organizations, NetLogOn. David Elfassi is going to be joining me for that one. They specialize in building the logic behind these things. We're going to talk about how we do it in the platform, and then if you're going to do it, what are some of the things you got to think about? Right? What are some of the best practices? And then my favorite new feature.
Love this slide.
Cyber range. So I want to kind of get a little bit of context. Get a little bit of context on this. Actually, before we do that, there's a couple of questions that came in there. Does the percentage of completion work, or does it work? So it depends on whether the lab has it enabled or not, right? If the lab has detailed steps in the environment, then it will track which steps the user has done and hasn't done.
Correct.
If it doesn't, then it won't. And then clarify into the completion of work. Phyllis, I don't know what you mean.
Phyllis was asking the question of the guest.
I got
there.
you. Oh,
That's
okay.
what it was.
Excellent. Okay.
And then somebody else responded with the answer that you just gave.
Yep. Sweet. Okay.
Yep.
So thank you. So cyber range. If you're in the military or the security business, there's a lot of companies out there that are in the business of hacking and counter hacking, attack, defend, et cetera, and in that world. And so one of the things that they often want to work on is a cyber range, right? It's like the military when they want to train on how to attack an enemy, they go to a range, they shoot guns.
Right.
Well, in the virtual world, you want to provide that environment as well, where I want to have a team of attackers and a team of defenders, and a set of targets, right? And the most common scenario is the attackers want to take the target down, the defenders want to keep the target running.
Right.
So maybe the defenders are inside the firewall, maybe the attackers are outside the firewall.
Correct.
So how do we deploy that in a lab environment? And so what we've built with our shared lab is you can build a lab environment that's full of targets, right? Maybe it's just switches and routers. Maybe it's a web server, a database, and a firewall. Maybe it's a single network. Maybe it's 10 networks.
Right.
It's anything you can build in here, right?
Right.
So we're going to look at some really elaborate network scenarios in the next session. They can be shared network scenarios where you can have, routers and switches and then 4 students on each end. And the first one to get to to take down the switch in the middle wins, or
Right.
things like that. I mean, the creativity you can put into this is virtually endless. So you define the shared environment, and then you define what we call participant workstations, right? So I can say, Kali Linux is by far the most common build of Linux that's used for attack and defense scenarios. It's basically Linux full of hacking tools. So you can say, hey, all my students get a Kali Linux box, a Windows box, and a Mac. And so every student that comes in gets these 4 VMs that spin up, but they're all on the same network.
Correct.
They can all see each other.
Yep.
They can all see the target. And so there's some, we've been doing this with a customer of ours for a while now, not in this formal cyber range as a product, but this is where the product came from. The idea for this came from, to where they would set up this one sort of network, and they'd put some VMs on it, and they'd see which student could be the first to take the VM offline.
Right.
They'd attack it. As soon as they took it offline, they'd reset it, and they'd try all over again. And the students love it, and it's fun, and it's great. And so we've now made this essentially a product that anybody can do. So I love it. I really do.
In the case of a student, or a developer coming up with their own cyber range and then using that as a selling tool.
I'm going to take a sip of my unbranded generic water.
That's right. Unbranded, generic, completely
Innocent water.
still
Innocent
water.
Still water, just water. But the cool thing about this is that it's not just, no.
I think you have to address that elephant in the room.
Leave that one alone. Leave it alone. Technically, yes, we can virtualize Mac OS.
Technically.
If you do want to do it, talk to me. There are other
Legalities
things.
and costs.
There are legalities and costs, yeah, but technically we can do it.
Right.
Oh yeah, so with the shared lab environment, right? So we're positioning this as cyber range. It's the most common, most valid usage scenario. Is not the only one though.
That is correct.
One of the things I think is going to be interesting with this is this notion of shared administration role playing, right? So let's take an example of everybody's favorite product, SharePoint. Right? If you're going to deploy a lab with SharePoint, you need about 550 billion gigs of RAM.
Great.
And so if you want to do SharePoint training with 50 students, that becomes challenging, right?
It does.
It's resource intensive on us. It's cost prohibitive on the part of the customer.
Yes.
So you can now do one SharePoint instance and give the students all workstations. And maybe there's 3 students in a group, and you get the developer tools, I get the administration tools, and he gets the security tools.
Yep.
And we can all now work on that same SharePoint instance together.
Right.
Right?
Using SharePoint.
Right. You can imagine a class where we have 10 students in a class, and we have this shared environment that's a bunch of domain controllers, a bunch of networks, some databases, some Linux boxes, some firewalls, and the class has to work together as a unit to complete a configuration project. And so they've got to go, all right, you do the firewall, I'll do the database, and Sally here is going to do the domain. Mm-hmm. And you collaborate and you build it all out. And so you get this real simulation of real world environments. There's a lot of room for creativity here in how you build these sort of next generation lab experiences. We experimented with stuff like this years ago. We had one called a wiki lab, where it wasn't virtualized. It was just a rack of servers and a bunch of workstations. And you had to come in and just, here's the spec. It's 40, 50 real big projects. And you come in and you do what you can. The next person comes in and do what they can. And we built this thing out. It's taken that now to the cloud, essentially.
Yep.
So a lot of really interesting things you can do in here. One of my favorite is the death match. Where it's...
I'm not sure you should call it that.
Well, it's like I said, I took all the scenarios from essentially first-person shooter video games.
Exactly.
Which, according to my kids, is what I do all day. But literally, my 8-year-old said that to me. She goes, "You go upstairs, you work? I thought you just played video games." No, honey, I really don't. So, and her mother kind of gave me a weird look at that point. But anyway, so there's a notion of, hey, the shared environment is just DHCP and DNS, and everybody gets, a workstation, and the last one whose machine works at the end of the day wins.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just fun things you can do. And then the final bit here is the event services, right? And so this is what Kim's team, Kim, come here. If you've never seen Kim, this is what Kim looks like.
If you've never seen Kim, this is what Kim looks like.
Kim looks like.
Hello.
There he is.
There's Kim right here. Don't trip in that, so. All right, thank you. Good man.
Don't get out here.
So Kim,
Phyllis is not in you.
It's all good. So what Kim's team does is, if a customer comes to us and says, "Hey, I want to have, I want to do some labs and some training, but I want to do it, in 40 cities around the world. Help me." So what Kim's team does is they can work with that customer to design the event, design how they're going to do the logistics, help them pick locations, send people on site. We've got people on site right now in where?
Copenhagen.
Copenhagen, which is where Kim's from, ironically. So we got people on site today that are supporting customer events all over the world. So there's an entire delivery support mechanism that you can have in there. So this is a great set of capabilities if you want to take advantage of it. Kim's going to talk about this in a session later today, because there's a lot of technical platform capabilities in there as well. Custom logons, authentication, reporting schemes, ways we can present it. So there's a lot that goes into it.
I want to address our customers who are communicating with us virtually. There is a slight time delay, so we don't see the questions that come up right away. If you need to take another sip of water, there's a question from one of our guests that says, "I use LODS for SharePoint training," and your question is, you get a SharePoint environment for every student who joins. Could you use this shared lab environment to be able to have them have a single SharePoint domain, if you will, and then have the participants each come in with a client?
Yep.
You absolutely could do that.
That's the point behind it.
Yep. So you are a good candidate for using the shared lab environment, or as we sort of call it, cyber range.
Yeah. Kim, are you going to be showing the new themes in the LMS? Yes. Okay. So for that question, are you going to show the look and feel for the MLS? I've got soccer on the brain.
How about TMS?
TMS. Yes, he will. And then there's some questions about Mac OS.
Go ahead, officially say it. You're the owner.
No, well,
or the CEO. Excuse me.
Technically, I'll go back to what I said before. Technically, yes, we can run Mac OS on the platform. However,
it gets quiet when he says
there
that.
are legal restrictions on what we can do and how we can do it that are very scenario specific. So if you do have a situation where you want Mac OS training, talk to us and we can put something in place. But there are restrictions on what we have to do behind the scenes to comply with Apple's EULAs, essentially.
Exactly.
And it's not as cut and dry as what we do with everything else with Windows and Linux.
Yep.
Where you can just go click a button, launch. There's more stuff we've got to do in the back end for scheduling, for balancing, et cetera. So technically, yes, we can do it. Technically, we've been able to do it for a really, really long time.
That's correct.
But if we've decided that we're going to, if someone wants to, we will. So we took a look at it.
Yep.
So our next kind of interesting point is edX.
edX.
So edX is, a popular up-and-coming thing in the training world. The idea of MOOCs, massively open online curriculums. And so we have full support for edX within the platform. edX uses the LTI framework, which is learning. I forgot what it stands for. Learning tech. What does it stand for, Kirk? LTI. Yeah, it stands for something.
It stands for LTI.
Yeah, it's just one of the things about the term learning technologies integration, something like that. But
somebody's going to type it.
Someone's going. I know they will. So it's someone Google that, please. It's essentially a protocol that enables learning platforms that are not ordinarily related to talk to each other. So any platform that supports LTI can essentially consume content from any other platform that supports LTI. So edX being kind of the one that's driving this. But if you're on edX, you can find anything that supports LTI, you can add that to an edX course. Well, guess what? You can add things from the OneLearn platform to an edX course, including labs. And you can return scoring data from these labs. So you can, via an edX course, determine did someone complete a lab, what percentage of the lab did they complete, based on a couple of different variables and criteria. And if it's PBT, learning tools interoperability, there you go. If it's PBT, you can return the score they received. So you can have, video, lab, video, lab, test.
Yep.
And you can say completed video, completed lab, and then got 80% on the test. Mm-hmm. And you can do all that within edX. And in fact, at the end of this event, all these training modules that we're doing here are going to actually go on edX as a course. So you'll be able to go there. We're going to have our own little edX site, and we'll have 3 courses, one for each session or each track that we're doing here.
Yep.
So really excited about that. That's a fun thing that a lot of our, especially international customers, are particularly keen on.
Mm-hmm. And there was a question way back at the beginning that said if they couldn't attend the whole thing, is it possible for them to be able to see these videos? And Phyllis was kind enough to mention that we will also have them on our Help Center, broken up into chunks.
Yeah, they're going to go on the Help Center. They're going to go on our YouTube channel. We're going to be socializing them. Tweet booking them.
Tweet booking.
So lots of different ways that we'll make this available.
Yes.
I'm making stuff up. VM's optional. So this is something we debuted last fall.
Yes.
Which is what we call our PowerShell learning environment. And so one of the things that's been up and coming in the industry as of late is the idea of containers.
Right.
Okay? So we can now run a lab in a container. And so we can give you something like, an environment such as this that you can embed within a blog, and just have a lab just inline in a document. And so we've got an example on our website over here. Let me find the web. Here we go. So this is our website, and this is our PowerShell containers for blogs post. And right in the middle of that is an actual PowerShell session that you can work in. And so there's code on how to do this. Here's how you would embed it. And so we're encouraging people to try that out. So this is still kind of a preview release. But you can now embed a lab environment in any document on the web that you want. And we're working on ways of doing this with virtual machines as well, so that you don't need to go to a dedicated environment. The learning experience can be inline in the documentation.
Exactly. And this is out there right now on our blog, so feel free to go check that out.
Azure is a big investment point for us. We alluded to this in the beginning. We've got a session on what we're doing here, but things like ARM templates, we can run virtual machines natively on Azure as opposed to on Hyper-V if that's something your customer wants. We can manage Azure credentials. We can issue subscriptions, all sorts of fun things that just make the experience of learning on Azure better. And this is something we're adding capability to all the time.
Yes.
So, 2 things that we want to kind of announce, I guess pseudo-announce. One of them is starting in April, if you build content, you're going to be able to choose from 2 service levels, okay? Or I guess, experience levels, not service levels. Basic and premium. And so basic is if all you want to do is put a virtual machine in front of somebody, right? Or you want to put a container in front of somebody, or you want to put just the minimum in front of somebody at a lower price point, it can be done as basic. And the UI modifies, it takes out some of the elements. There's some capabilities that are not made available to keep it down to a kind of a really, really low price point. And then we also are going to have our premium experience, which is all the lights turned on, all the bells and whistles, everything.
Exactly.
And so you'll be able to choose from that when you build. So you can build and say, you know what, this is only available basic, only available premium, or you can choose when you deploy. For example, if you're doing things like GitHub integration, inline documents, PBT, that's all premium.
Right.
If you just want to say, hey, give me a workstation that's got some tools in it, and I'm going to do everything else on my own. I just want the workstation with tools. You can do that as basic, and you can deliver that at a much lower price point. So certainly talk to your account rep, or email our sales at learnondemandsystems.com, and you can talk to them about that. And then we are also launching 2 new data center regions.
This is big news.
This is big news. Australia, which is set to come online in a couple of weeks, actually. And so we're going to be servicing all of APAC. We've got some really cool things we've done down there, and people go, well, Australia's not really known to be the best place for bandwidth.
Right.
Turns out that's not true anymore. We are, because of the provider we were able to work with, we are literally milliseconds from most of APAC. From Azure, I think it's 4 milliseconds to Azure from the location we're in. In fact, I think Azure is like the next rack, literally. So it's a really good location. We've got incredible pipes. We're right on the major ingress and egress routes for the continent. So for anyone that's in APAC, this is going to be a significant improvement for them.
Yep, absolutely.
And so we'll be announcing that. We'll be releasing the pricing for it in the next coming weeks. And then also shortly thereafter, APAC's kind of the bigger challenge region because it's much more sporadic in terms of where you go. It's much more regional. Western Europe, we need to add additional capacity anyway, so we're going to do it in Western Europe and actually in London. The little thing looks like it's in kind of Birmingham or Manchester more so than London, but it's close enough.
I was going to say Wales.
Yeah, it's not Wales. Wales is out here.
Oh.
This is more Manchester, I think. Someone in the UK is going to correct me. That's more Manchester, I think. But it's going to be servicing all of Western Europe, Africa, and the Middle East.
Right.
And it'll reduce by about 150 milliseconds to hop. For that region, it's not that big a deal. Europe's got really good connectivity back to the States. But it's a convenient place to put it because there are some pockets in Europe where where that matters, that 150 milliseconds actually matters. It's not Bravo, there are some places.
Somebody did put where the pin is.
Derbyshire, England. There you go. I said you can count on
The world will tell you.
Exactly.
Derbyshire, not Derbyshire.
That was a horrible accent you just tried to pull off.
I didn't. I was reading it.
You said Derbyshire.
Derbyshire. I think I'm a pirate, I guess. I have the hair for it.
You do.
There is a question.
Yes.
Is there a way to direct customers to the overseas location?
The plan, and I haven't talked to our own dev staff about this yet.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
So you're going to announce it here?
Well, I know Chris is listening, and Robert's right there. So the plan is to be able to have the client will auto-select the region that's best based on ping latency, or you can force a region.
Right.
Based on
which we can do right now.
Schedule something. Yeah. Well, not the way I want to do it. I want to do it a little bit better.
You want to do it different?
I want to do it better.
Okay.
I want to improve it.
Excellent.
So that's that. So that's coming. So if you're in those areas, that's big exciting news. So that's it. That is.
You did
our
good.
Intro. How are we doing on time? Perfect.
5 minutes.
So if there's any questions that want to pop in real quick, we can try and address them for you. So just give it just a second here because there is a slight delay. While that's happening, boys.
Come on in. We want to introduce you to some of the staff you're going to be seeing throughout the show.
They all kind of look alike, which is not
we all
intentional.
Coordinated except for Corey. Well, and Victor.
And Kirk and Victor. Real quick, this is Victor. Victor works in our content team. You're going to be seeing a lot of him today. Go this way now. This is Kirk. Kirk's the resident smart guy.
Oh,
there we go. Yeah, Kirk's the resident smart guy. PowerShell guy, and our containers.
GitHub.
The routing and switching. So he's had a busy time. So Kirk's up next, by the way, right here. This is Kirk's spot. Robert, who writes code for a living.
He's also a human being. I mean,
periodically he is. So the Robert will be in here for Azure cloud stuff. So later on this afternoon. So we'll see Robert back, and he's got some really cool demos on Azure. And then Kim, we saw earlier. Yeah. And then finally we have Quinn. I want to tell you a story about Quinn. I hired Quinn 5 years ago, back when he had hair. And he wasn't gray. And he came to me and I said, what do you do for a living, Quinn? He said, well, I play in a band, I'm a barista, I'm a bartender, I'm a skydiving instructor, and I lead spearfishing tours. And I went, I'll teach you the rest. I just want that around. And so now he runs a lot of our content business, supports a lot of customers, so does a great job. So you'll be seeing Quinn with you a lot, with Brian a lot.
And a little bit with you.
And a little bit with me. What are you with? No, you're not with me.
No, with Kim.
With Kim, yeah, with Kim, sorry. How'd you get us confused?
I think it's the accent.
Could be. So that's some of the team that's here.
There is a question. I have SCORM content to accompany my lab environments. Is there going to be anything that's based on that? And I think you're going to want to look for the end-to-end session because that'll be part of the LMS integration.
Swarm is supported within the LMS.
Right.
So that's it. I will thank you guys all for joining. We're about out of time.
Yes.
Come back in 30 minutes for our next round of sessions. We have Kirk and we have Brian. Kirk will be right in here, and then Brian's going to be in a different.
And then we have Kim.
Different Zoom. Kim's up next as well.
Yeah. No,
No,
not that's.
no.
Oh, just me and Kirk.
Me and Kirk. So.
All right.
All right. Thanks guys for
guys.
joining. Appreciate it, and we'll see you soon.